Welcome to the Revolution Insight series. This is going to be the episode on the Chinese Revolution. And this is in regard to, I believe, between the 40s and I want to say the 60s, but they call it the Cultural Revolution. And I mean, this is going to be another huge topic that I'm going to take honestly, this one video I feel like is a small bite in terms of actually understanding and really getting into the Chinese history as a whole, but just the revolution period. This idea is centered around a figure known as Mao, right? So Mao was essentially just the kind of the figurehead for this idea of the Chinese Revolution. And Mao, he had a basically power, but it's a very complex situation in terms of how it's understood and the actual, or how you actually comes across in the video. It's not quite black and white as we get over here in the West, of course, but Mao, at some point, my first notice here is that he hijacked a student-led movement, right? And that's where I feel like that's where a lot of the energy is when it comes down to just revolution in general, right? When you're talking about where the energy is, it's students, right? And he did things that kind of sound, honestly, eerily familiar in terms of like he didn't quite have power, and like he didn't quite have power in terms of the economics. He wasn't really seen as someone who was especially gifted in economics. He was more so just someone that was more the figurehead, and it seems like Mao wanted to change this, and he became really aggressive. And I mean, in terms of the parallel today, I'm seeing the aggression of Trump being cheered on by the people, or not by the people, but by a large population of people without real understanding that, I mean, Trump is, I'll try to keep this to a minimum, but Trump is deep state sanctioned, in my opinion. It's completely just how it is, and I'm gonna keep that to a minimum in terms of this Revolution Insight series. But Mao did not have he didn't have power, but he became aggressive in terms of attacking and targeting people in the administration that could threaten his power. And nobody's seen it coming with Mao in general, and that is, it's definitely something, because the way he was able to essentially hijack the student-led movement, gain kind of a populist, essentially a populist mask to wear. And I mean, maybe not as the veneer of populism was important to Mao in terms of how far he was able to get. But in terms of the idea of Mao, he essentially was pro-rebellion. That's how he kind of got his that's kind of how he kind of kept his populist movement going, in terms of his populist veneer, we'll say, and essentially tended to it. He was telling students to throw the emperor off. One of the quotes that was really popular apparently was "throw the emperor off of his horse," and he only started he started this anarchy chaos to gain control later on. And that's another thing that's really kind of something to where, like, you can start to appear anarchist, but you really want to destroy a system so that people are more incentivized to accept something that they would not accept if there was any other option. And honestly, that's what it looks like with the tech bros right now around Trump. But in general, intellectuals were a target, and they were targeted, and it wasn't. It was very much interesting because there was a section of intellectuals in terms of the actual teachers that were targeted, and found, and they used that to essentially take down a lot of teachers, even a lot of petty disputes and things like that as well. But there was also kind of a spread of intellectualism in terms of our education in general. This is, I feel like I do a disservice to not mention the fact that I actually have read the book, the Great, I believe it's called The Great Starvation, and basically they talk about this particular idea that this story kind of talks about, or mentions a few times, and I firmly do believe that there was a bit of essentially exaggeration in terms of what I was reading in general, but it sounded, if it was in the least bit true in terms of how much of it was true, we can talk enough for debate. But if there was truth to the idea of kind of the hierarchical system and promoting people not telling the truth to their superiors because they don't want to be blamed for essentially just reality, that could end up extremely bad. And when it comes down to intellectuals being targeted, I don't think that's ever a good sign. And we need to definitely understand why that is. I don't think of myself as an intellectual. I think that there's a lot of people out there that really do need to be questioned more. But to target them in a way like this it's worrisome, because you're not targeting them with ideas on, you're targeting them with the concepts of, they are against the administration, or they are against the idea of revolution. And another thing was, with this student-led movement that Mao hijacked, at some point he armed the students, and he promoted them to attack and become more militant. And eventually, where he went really wrong was he gave them the ability to essentially attack, or gave them the green light to essentially attack the army. And that's where things, of course, go wrong, right? You got a whole bunch of young kids trying to attack seasoned just seasoned military, and you're those kids are gonna wake up very soon, in terms of they're gonna wake up to a very different reality. And a young movement like that, they can have their energy, but you gotta kind of watch the you don't attack the military to where my paycheck depends on how well that I can basically handle violence. That's not a very smart move to do. But essentially, that was what Mao was trying to do. He kind of flew a little too close to the sun, it seems like. But also the idea of petty disputes, this was something that was really quite prevalent during the Chinese Revolution in general. Petty disputes, or they call it struggle sessions, essentially, to where people would essentially utilize the veneer or utilize this messaging of being anti-revolution or anti-Mao in some cases, and they'll say this person did this, and they'll make this claim, and essentially it became a witch hunt, right? Like the Salem witch trials. That's kind of how this went. That's how this person, this person's a bad person because of X, and everybody else doesn't want to look like they're, like they're a voice of reason here, because then it becomes very dangerous for them. So kind of you start to get people essentially in very, very violent situations, right? Like when people get in groups and they're doing violence in groups as a mob, it can get very bad. And that's honestly what happened in a lot of cases, it looks like. So one thing I liked about this video, it seemed balanced, it seemed like he was trying to stay balanced with a few things. I would definitely recommend this video, and also just looking beyond the pale when it comes down to understanding countries like China, of course, and Russia as well, but just really trying to figure out what these particular countries are trying to do, what they're trying to represent. And I think there is definitely an aspect to what they've become in response to the environment that we've created, because we are honestly don't be fooled by the mask of civility in terms of what we do at home. Even I think nowadays it's a little bit easier to recognize just how monstrous we can be, but when it comes down to what we do abroad, you still don't quite understand. It does. We are bullish abroad, and when it comes down to our dedication to protect large corporations and their interest, it does come down to how do we repress other people? How do we repress all these other people and essentially just keep our populace in an illusion that we are good people, And honestly, that's kind of that's the biggest job. Right? The biggest job for a politician nowadays is keeping a job. That's what they do. They need to make sure that people see them as useful in a civil society. But if you're an alien coming down to a population of people and you see a lot of politicians, that's an indicator that these people have settled differences without the use of violence. We live in a society that doesn't have violence within the society, but make no mistake, we are in constant conflict abroad. These politicians are not useful to civil society, right? And that's why they're where they're at. They're very useful in keeping up the illusion, and just something to think about in general. So and of course, for this Revolution Insight series, this idea is to basically give more insight into to gain more insight to the different revolutions that take place, and also kind of add to the kind of the background noise that I'm using to develop the idea of this particular manga and what's going to go into it, or this particular multimedia series in this world that I'm trying to build here. And in any case, I really hope you like it. I hope you go and watch more videos and learn more about the Chinese Revolution. But also, if you want to support in any way, you can always comment, and follow, of course. And I'm going to be sure to release more information about what I have available and what will be available soon. So in any case, thank you for listening.